Investigating.
Here's a serious question about comedy. We all know that comedians can run circles round politicians, pricking their pomposity and pointing to the flaws in their arguments. But can politicians use comedy not just to make us laugh, but to make us vote for them?
There's not very many who are very good at it, I'm afraid, and usually it's inadvertent. It's Theresa May not being able to read a calendar. You know, to be honest, they make it too easy for us.
Ping pong was invented on the dining tables of England, ladies and gentlemen, in the 19th century. It was called whiff-waff. And there, I think, you have the essential difference between us and the rest of the world. Other nations, the French, looked at a dining table and saw an opportunity to have dinner. We looked at the dining table and saw an opportunity to play whiff-waff.
Boris Johnson done rather well by people seemingly not being all that savvy. He was funnier than Ken.
Of course, the first rule of comedy is you've got to be funny. And for some politicians, that's a tall order.
Rupert Murdoch is on for the series after. He's been out shopping with Andy Coulson already. They've bought him a pair of tap shoes.
Of course, if you really want to carve out a name for yourself as a funny politician, then you really need to be delivering something like this.
The House has noticed the Prime Minister's remarkable transformation in the last few weeks from Stalin to Mr. Bean.
At least I don't have to worry about her running off with the bloke next door.
No, if you're not funny, don't try, and, if you're Gordon Brown, don't smile. There are very few who can get away with it and deliver a good gag, unfortunately.
Of course, funny political moments tend to be one-liners. It takes real talent to actually bring the house down.
Picture the face of our poor Prime Minister as the name of Blair is placed in nomination by one President and Prime Minister after another. The look of utter gloom on his face. The nauseating, glutinous praise oozing from every head of government. The rapid revelation of a majority view agreed behind closed doors when he was, as usual, excluded. Never would he regret more no longer being in possession of a veto. The famous... The famous drop jaw almost hitting the table as he realises there is no option but to join in. And then the awful moment when the motorcade of the President of Europe sweeps into Downing Street. The gritted teeth and bitten nails. The Prime Minister emerging from his door with a smile of intolerable anguish. The choking sensation as the words Mr. President are forced from his mouth. And then, once in the cabinet room, the melodrama of when will you hand over to me all over again.
Pure genius. Joining Griff, comedian and writer who helped Boris Johnson with some jokes during his 2008 campaign, Tom Greeves. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, there are only few politicians can get away with something like that. Isn't that right?
Very few.
Most should probably not try to be funny.
It's hugely high risk, I think, telling a joke. And in fact, I did advise Boris not to do too many jokes because I knew he'd be funny naturally, kind of 4 or 5 times through any speech. The risk is enormous. If you say one and it falls flat, then you're stuffed for the rest of your speech.
And that's worse than no joke at all, you would say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Far better to use an amusing anecdote, because then if it falls flat, at least you've advanced the speech in another way.
But comedians find humour in politics.
Oh, yeah, but, I mean, what's interesting is why don't the people like funny people? I mean, in a way that we see, we've had a race for London between 2 clowns. Effectively, the 2 clowns of the party have been set up because it's a presidential race. But when you get into cabinet, then there's a sense of having to balance, and so comedy becomes something which is too dangerous.
Yes, boring.
Now, here's a question I'd like to... Why are, in general, comedians on the left?
Well, I'm not sure if they really are. I think there's 2 main reasons. One, I think the alternative comedy scene was very much a deliberate reaction
Which came
to
up
Thatcherism.
under Mrs. Thatcher, yeah.
Exactly, and that's kind of, I think, encouraged other people to join in. I think the other thing is a very British reluctance to pick on anyone who's a perceived underdog, and likewise to be too generous to anyone who's in a position of privilege. I can't imagine anyone's going to go on live at the Apollo anytime soon and make the case for cutting the 50p rate of tax and saying aren't bankers fantastic?
Not if they want to be invited back.
Right.
I guess. Right. So you, but are comedians in general, because you mix a lot of them, are they generally on the left?
I'm just trying to think. They are, yes. But publicly, there's a lot of... I think there's a sense that a comedian has to be on the left because for exactly the reasons that Tom
maybe some
said.
posturing as well.
And in fact, right-wing comedians, sort of like Jeremy Clarkson, are routinely slagged off.
He's a comedian?
Well, Jeremy is. He's a one-liner. You know,
That's
he's
true.
a man who likes to deal in one-liners. And he's despised by a lot of the comic community, I think, for being so successful at doing it.
Yes.
And I was surprised. I hosted a programme recently where everybody had a go at Boris. But
Very
it's interesting that the right wing actually allow themselves to be funny in politics and the left wing find it much more difficult.
That's a very interesting point. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on. That's all for today. Thanks to all of our guests. Now, I'm on This Week Tonight on BBC One, 11:35. I hope you can join me then. I'll be back here tomorrow on BBC Two.
Yeah, you know.